So first of all, thanks a lot for attending this panel. It's going to be a great discussion because we have a lot of people on stage today, so I'm going to try to make sure everyone speaks and shares their experience. I think what's super rich about this panel in particular is that we have ESOs and early stage investors, but what we really have is a diversity of actors that really bring a different angle to the table to talk about the African ecosystems as a whole, especially the early stage ones. So maybe let me start by reframing a few numbers about where we stand today. So today, if we look at the African ecosystems, but at Africa as a whole, Africa is, I think, approximately 17% of the world's population. It's 4% of the world's GDP, but it's only 1% of the VC allocation. So we're really speaking of, of numbers that don't really have matching ratios, right? How do we create a more equal ecosystem? How do we really cater to the needs not only of the people who live in Africa, but also of the people who launch businesses in Africa, of the founders? And how do we cater to the needs for investment? How do we cater to the needs for education, for capacity building? And interestingly enough, when you look and you zoom in a bit on what type of capital gets to Africa, you see that approximately 70%, which is 1,100-ish people or organization, are ESOs and angel investors and all those syndicates and likes. So what you see is that initiatives that start at early stage ecosystem building or that come directly from founders who exited and have money to reinvest represent 70% of everything that happens on the continent, which makes this conversation even more important, right? If you guys represent 70% of what's coming up, I mean, you guys and everybody else probably in this room and working in that ecosystem represent 70% of what we are doing today on the continent, I think we should be listening to all of you. And that's what I want to do today, but before we do that, I'd like every single one of you to introduce yourself, but most importantly, your organization as well, and what you're doing for the continent and on the continent today. Okay, yeah, you start.
Okay, thank you. And thanks to the organizers for having me here. I'm Jake Kendall, I run the DFS Lab, and we're an early stage investor focused on African tech companies. Some of the things that differentiate us, I think, we're one of the few institutionals that is focused at the pre-seed, essentially, so our sweet spot is sort of pre-seed to seed. We have a thesis based around digital commerce, so our view is that the opportunity in front of us right now in Africa is to digitize the economy, and so we invest in what you might call next generation digital commerce, you know, not websites where you go to order a phone and get it delivered, but really full-scale digital commerce architecture and infrastructure that's mostly B2B and moves large chunks of the African economy into a digital form, so things across the major arterial value chain sectors. I think another thing that differentiates us is we're very intense. I think we're one of the most intense early stage investors in terms of support. We have a full-time entrepreneur support director, and he's founder of of Wallets.Africa, and has worked across lots of other startups in his career and brings a really very, sort of validated we validate that across all the support we give to our entrepreneurs, and we bring them sort of high-powered problem solving, basically. So we do anything in the form of modules around particular things. We start with a real diagnostic understanding of the company and what they need and others. And then we try to build what's called top entrepreneurs in the space and our team. We do a lot of research and get questions about the digital commerce models from around the world.
Yasmin, you want to jump in?
Sure, thank you. So it's great to be here. I manage the accelerator program at AUC Venture Lab. And to those who don't know us, we are a university-based startup accelerator that's been around since 2013. So we're pushing our 10th year this year, and we've graduated over 200 startups. We have around an 80% survival rate. from the startups that we've worked with. We've recently been awarded Best Accelerator in North Africa, Africa, and the Middle East. So this is something we're very proud of. We actually work with entrepreneurs on everything that entails refining their business models, getting to know their sectors with more depth, and preparing them for investment. So we actually don't directly offer a fund as an accelerator, but we work very closely with our twin organization, which is AUC Angels. I think you may have met the person, Mariam Kemal. She's running this part of the organization. And so we work very closely with them to prepare entrepreneurs for investments and to make them investment ready. So a lot of the time when we're working with early stage entrepreneurs, they approach us with models thinking they're ready to raise funds, and most of the time they need a little bit more work. So this is what we do with our current program in collaboration with AUC Angels. And we work in a variety of sectors. We have a special interest, of course, in fintech, e-commerce, health tech, green and sustainability startups, and so on.
Thanks a lot. And I think you're also collaborating quite a bit with other ecosystem members such as Flat 6 Labs and Plug and Play. So let's maybe Flat start just in order of continuation.
Thank you for having me today. It's working. Collaboration. Thank you for having me today. I'm Mohammed. I'm principal at Flat 6 Labs, managing the company's fund in Egypt. Flat 6 Labs is one of the top investors in the region. Creating the Africa and Egypt partnership, and we decided to expand and scale our operations on the African continent, and we launched the new Africa Seed Fund. It's an $85 million fund covering North, East, and West Africa. It will be the same as our investing model. We are the first institutional check in any startup, and we invest in programs. It's a program that is, our value proposition is not only the funding, but also our corporate network, our mentorship programs, our connections with our entrepreneurship enabling organizations and the ecosystems that we are operating in. And we believe that this will be the coming years for Africa, and that's why we're excited to be part of this growth of the continent in terms of VCs and early stage startups.
Hi everyone, I'm Ahmed Mansour. I'm heading the Business Development and Corporate Partnerships division within Plug and Play Egypt, and scaling on a regional basis, inshallah. So Plug and Play, we like to call ourselves an open innovation platform. We have operations across more than 30 countries. We have about 3 business lines that we really focus on in terms of accelerators that are corporate backed. We run more than 60 accelerator programs across 18 verticals on an annual basis, and we have quite an active VC arm. We rank amongst the top 10 most active VCs on a global scale, second most active on focusing on sustainability and sustainability solutions. And finally, we have the corporate innovation arm, which is the one that I'm in charge of here in Egypt, where we go through to and offer consulting services to larger corporates to engage with early stage entrepreneurs or innovation solutions as a whole. Be it on part to optimize internal operations within their corporates, or sort of additional product offerings that they can extend through to their client base. Yeah, that's very much in brief what we do and what I do.
Thanks a lot. And then Mark, maybe you can wrap up with your international.
I will wrap up. Right. Mark Birch. I am a former founder of an HR tech company, angel investor, advisor to many startups. I wrote a book on community building, if anyone has questions about that. And I'm presently at AWS, Global Startup Advocate. So what does that mean? I get to talk on panels like this and discuss really cool things that help startup founders to build, grow, and scale faster, and also sharing in some of that conversation about the programs and services that we provide to help startups and startup ecosystems to thrive.
So essentially, if you want an AWS t-shirt or a nice book, you should turn to Mark.
Yes, nice t-shirts. I don't have the t-shirts, but I may have some books.
Aha, interesting, interesting. Great. No, thanks a lot for the introduction. And so this gives a great idea of the variety of stakeholders that we have to support early stage founders on the continent. Now, I wanted to take a slightly different approach to this panel than the title you see on the screen, which is what are Africa-based ESOs and early stage investors doing to accelerate startups to scale, and try to look at it the other way around and work it backwards. So now, fast forward in a few years, we are in 2035, and we are sitting here in Cairo, it's May 2nd, and we are discussing the state of the ecosystem then. So you guys, I want each of you to give one trait that the African ecosystems, be the VC ecosystems, the e-commerce ecosystem, the ESO ecosystem, looks like in 2035. And whomever wants to start can start.
I can start. I mean, if I'm to flash back to 2023, majority of the backing that we've had in terms of plug and play, in terms of setting up accelerator programs for early stage entrepreneurs have been all consistently backed up by government entities. And I think that the enablement is great initiative to sort of kickstart the connection between government bodies and early stage entrepreneurs to really get them to roll out and start to really generate further traction from there. But if I'm to fast forward to 2035, definitely by then we have seen a bit more of a pickup within corporates themselves engaging with startups and engaging within new innovations and being more agile and more open to the idea of collaborating with startups. If I'm to flash back, there was been definitely a lot of resistance on that point. I think anyone that's sort of shaking up a new product model of some sort is constantly met with some sort of resistance. And a lot of the corporates that do take initiative within that scope had been more taking an angle of a CSR as opposed to actually trying to find something of value and something that they can potentially push out through to the market. We've come a very long way from 2023 where that mindset has completely shifted and has completely changed. So we've seen quite extensive progress over the past 12 years.
What do you think are the key elements that these corporates have worked on to get to where they are today in 2035? Have they created middle managers, for example, in charge of bringing that innovation in-house? What are the core features?
Definitely. I mean, a lot more of the corporates have seen a pivot towards the and have actually recognized the importance of having an innovation arm as a whole, be it internal or external. In soliciting other ESOs, in setting up corporate-backed accelerators, or internally within themselves, realizing the value that brings in from new innovations. And probably also seeing the successful track record from new innovations that have come around over the past couple of years had them sort of pivot their direction.
I can actually add something in terms of corporates as well. I think that in the next couple of years, we're going to see a lot of even transfer of human capital between corporates and startups. So I can definitely speak about maybe the past 5 to 6 years in the ecosystem. Most of the entrepreneurs that we were actually working with were a lot younger. So they were sort of in the early 20s range. And so even from a corporate perspective, they were always very skeptical towards the model, towards the team, because of course they were younger, the ecosystem was a lot less advanced and so on. Right now, we're actually working with entrepreneurs who are pushing the 30 and 40 range. And these are people who have been in the corporate world for 10, 15, 20 years, and they're now getting into startups. Of course, there's a huge difference in how they operate because these people have a lot of technical experience, a lot of industry-specific experience and so on. And so that is contributing to the change between, or the change in the relationship between startups and corporates, because there's this moving around of different executives, and a lot of corporates are beginning to realize that they can have these conversations with startups and work with them, like Ahmed said, from a non-CSR perspective, because they're talking to people who were formerly part of their organizations and they're equals in the sense of experience and so on.
Yeah. No, for sure, it's super interesting, and maybe an anecdote on that front. At SeedStars, we're launching academies, which are educational institutions, and we actually had the case of a student who got a salary offer in South Africa at X before starting the program, launched a startup for a few months, decided to not go forward with his startup. The corporate came back and said, okay, we're doubling your salary and we're putting you in a management position because of that experience, because of the legitimacy that comes with building a solution and getting your hands in the engine for a few months, a few years. You're in a sector that's quite particular because e-commerce is starting to have more candles on the cake every year, but it's still a relatively new sector. Especially for corporates who have an approach that's less digital to commerce usually. Do you see the same trends in your sector?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think long run, there's got to be kind of this integration between the startup and the tech sector and the more, sort of staid, legacy corporate sector. And there's probably lots of different ways it can work, right? I mean, some of the collaborations that you guys are talking about, very important. I think we, currently a lot of our model, like I said, focuses on trying to apply digital commerce and e-commerce technology to large arterial value chains in the economy. So examples might be raw materials or construction. And in those sectors, we definitely see a lot of value to having founders who come from the corporate side of that sector. So those sectors tend to be a relatively small number of actors who are buying or selling raw materials or constructing big buildings. And to be credible with them, you usually have to have at least one founder who came from that sector and can bring the relationships and the walk the walk and talk the talk and just know how it works. So that's definitely an area where I would agree, you could see more founders coming out of that sector.
No, thanks a lot for these insights. And now if we jump more towards the side of the enablers, enabling essentially those companies, and I'm thinking, for example, Flat 6 Labs at the fund, on the fund side, if we are 12 years from now, these companies that have moved closer to corporates, etc., are invested in by whom? Are they still invested in by a Flat 6 Labs that has the shape that it has today? Or do you think the type of talents that you onboard to your fund has changed? Do you think the type of LPs that you onboard to the funds have changed? What do you see as the evolution of funds like yours who are really backing companies in large numbers across the continent?
So I will start let's start with our experience in Egypt. So in the past 5 years, we can see a great improvement in local talent. This is the first thing. The second thing, the social aspect or the movement from outside the corporate job and the stable job, it's something that in our culture, you have to be a banker, you have to be an engineer. This has changed. And the third thing is the enablement that is happening through the governmental entities and also private sector organizations. This helped us in finding a good quality of pipeline at the beginning of the day because we screened 2,000 applications each year to invest in 15, 16 startups. The second thing is the expansion towards Africa and the word scale itself. We see that founders at the beginning believe that the word scaling is about regional expansion overseas. However, no, this is not right. First thing, we tell them that scaling, you could scale. So for example, in Egypt, the demographics or the segmentation of the need of a customer in Cairo is totally different than a customer in Aswan, for example. It's still in Egypt. So this is a scale itself. And how do we help them as an accelerator to reach this scale locally is through the corporate side or the connections with corporates. And we start with corporates to tell them about this is not something that you're going to have exposure towards risk. So it's part of the accelerator and the enablers to educate corporates as well, not only the founders, that's something that will add value to your corporate and to the customers and your branding and so on. It's a win-win situation. And I think Egypt is no separate from Africa. From our screening before launching or announcing the launchment of our new fund, we saw that we have the similar demographics with the similar needs, with similar issues that entrepreneurs and technology will solve. How do I see this going forward to the coming 10, 12 years? I believe more early stage investors will be there, either angel networks, either accelerators, and on the other hand, more countries beyond Egypt, Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa will be flourishing in the ecosystem space in Africa, attracting numbers of startups being funded, attracting FDIs, such as maybe Senegal, Ghana, and others, because they started to governments and also ecosystem enablers, they started to see this is not something that is a luxury anymore, having those entrepreneurs, and as Yasmin said, the average age, me myself, I'm 37. I moved from the corporate VC side to the accelerator due to this. It's more vibrant, it solves more problems on ground rather than being committed to the corporate side. And on the other hand, the corporates started to either have their own dedicated, not innovation teams, but they say that they have the superstars or change makers who will speak the same language such as startups. And last year, we had multiple companies having partnerships with banks in Egypt, and anyone in Egypt will know how it's difficult for a retail person, not a startup, to deal with a basic banking product. It's not a lending facility. So to have startups having partnerships and onboard their services to the bank's customers or the telcos or any large corporate, it's a huge success that the ecosystem is getting the benefit from. So I believe that this could be a success story, that it will have a domino effect across countries in the African continent. So within 10 years from now, we will see that corporates will have this as part of their mandate to work with startups, similar to their strategy with regards to customer acquisition and so on.
No, thank you. And I think that's great news for Mark, because now your target market has just like grown exponentially on the continent. And on top, you have the obligation to come and work with these guys. How do you see that? How do you see the scaling also of your offering? Where do you see the needs for upcoming products maybe? Without, of course, revealing any secrets internal to AWS.
I would not give out any corporate secrets here on this panel from the AWS perspective. But what I can share is two really interesting things relevant to what we're discussing here about enabling startup activity on the continent. Because you need lots of different elements. You need the capital. You need the entrepreneurs. You need government policies even to help to ensure that you have a vibrant business ecosystem, and you need the markets. And that's what's been amazing. If you look at the past, a continent that passed 1 billion in population, now 2 billion, and expanding, GDP expanding, a rich marketplace. But what's also interesting is the talent base that's growing on the continent. And that's a core thing that I noticed many years ago. So I used to work at a place called Stack Overflow. Anyone here know Stack Overflow, has ever used it? Yeah, okay, some engineers in the crowd. Q&A, open source for the world to get answers to your programming questions. So I was doing some digging on our data, and this was back in 2017, back in the day when I was still young. And what was interesting is that the top two fastest growing developer ecosystems, not the biggest, but the fastest growing. Anyone want to take some guesses?
Nigeria?
No. They were in Southeast Asia. Now accelerating to 2035 that we're at on this panel right now, right? We're now in the present. The top growing, fastest growing developer and largest developer ecosystems are Nigeria,
I wasn't far.
Egypt, in South Africa, and more regions across the continent. And what we're doing is we're developing a culture of building in software. And that's what AWS has done to enable that by providing cloud education for free. So now anyone who wants to be that developer, who wants to build something, who wants to experiment, they can do it in the cloud, they can do it for low cost or even free through credits that we provide, and you can continue on that journey because there's the education, there's the ecosystem that AWS is providing to help startups grow from idea all the way to scale. And it's not just about even the tools itself, which are super important. You need builders to build really great startups that are globally enabled to scale, but you also need the ability to optimize, and you need the ability to go to market. And so from the AWS perspective, we've invested tons of resources in helping those early stage founders to find market, to gain visibility, to even maybe co-sell with our own sellers so they can accelerate their growth and reach markets that may not be accessible. Maybe you are selling into mid-markets and you want to sell into bigger companies. You could use our AWS Marketplace for data exchange. Now you have an opportunity to sell to a big enterprise, and it doesn't take a year. It could take less than a week. amazing in terms of thinking about scale. So those are the things that we're doing and providing here in the content that enable this ecosystem to have grown as fast as it has.
And maybe for the founders in the room, and to circle back to the initial point, which was the relationship between the innovation world, startups mostly, and corporates. How do you, for example, structure your activity today with founders, with ecosystem enablers, and potentially even with some funds? And how do you see that growing?
It's an amazing ecosystem because, again, I started with this whole idea of builders. How do you help the builders take an idea and create a company that is enabled for scale? So we've built an incredible partnership network across the globe with folks who can provide the capital. So working with Plug and Play, working with all the different venture and accelerator arms across the world. So we've done that through our business development teams. If some of you are walking around here today, definitely check out Rawad, who's my partner on the business development side, who could share all about our VC and accelerator relationships. And also, now you need customers. How do you do that? Well, I did mention things like our digital marketplace, the AWS marketplace or data exchange for that digital sales channel. We have lots of corporate relationships, though. And we almost see ourselves as taking not only the undifferentiated heavy lifting of building, but the undifferentiated heavy lifting of building a business and going beyond the technology. And how do you do that? It's because you have corporate relationships. And so from our perspective, it's working with our customers in enterprise and across all of our different sectors to help make those introductions, and the work of organizations that are also facilitating those introductions that we do through our events, that we do through some of our programming, and some of the mechanisms that we have in place to make some of those connections and make it easier for the entrepreneur in their journey to not just think about the technology now, and no, AWS, you're a technology provider, and that's it. No, it's going through that journey and saying, okay, there's a technology I could plug in here to build scale from a technology architecture standpoint, but also to scale as a business.
For sure. No, thanks for the explanation. So anyone, feel free to talk to Mark afterwards. Now, if we look, so you've provided a lot of insights, all of you, by the way, on how to support the companies. I think there's the other side of the equation is they will still need most likely capital, unless we have great products that sell from day one, which is of course super ideal, but not always the case. How do you see the investment landscape evolving? Do you see other players emerging, maybe earlier stage, 2035? Hopefully, we have the second, third, fourth wave of founders, people who founded repeatedly and who are now on the market, probably with pockets that are a bit more filled than 2023. How do you see that evolve? Potentially, the question could start with you.
Yeah, we believe that the overall ecosystem in terms of fundraising, yet it's currently difficult due to local, global situation that is affecting the riskiest asset class, which is establishing a company and venturing into investing into early stage companies. However, we believe that, for example, in Egypt, maybe 5 years ago, there were only 5 fund managers, 5 VCs operating in Egypt. Now they exceeded 40. And this is the same thing across different countries in the continent. So you can see that with regards to the different investment types, so if it's an early stage as an accelerator, or if even it's an angel network or a late stage investor, so those different kinds of investment to cater for the different needs of startups at different stages, we believe it will evolve because at the end of the day, you have supply of ideas or supply of problems to be solved. On the other hand, you need supply of funding to match this. What we were concerned about, and during the past 2 years with the COVID-driven business models, was the valuations. And this is something that we believe the overall correction that is happening now, it lets everyone to make sense of the valuation from both sides. I'm not going to pinpoint something towards an investor side or the founder side. Both sides were part of this valuation thing. So if the valuations got adjusted to the normal levels, fundamentals of the business were there, we believe that definitely more supply from funding side will come. And we can see that, for example, from our fundraising process now. in the beginning, we started this fundraising process last year for the Africa Seed Fund, and mostly we're talking to DFIs. Yes, they have their agenda with regards to support emerging markets and youth, but at the end of the day, it's an investment that they want to look for a return at the end of their investment period. In the past 4 or 5 months, we saw that although the challenges are there, but with their commitment towards funding in Africa and with the real problems that being presented to them in terms of the gap, for example, it's not only about the funding, the gap in education, educating founders about what to do and what not to do, because now you can have founders and companies with cash rich with funding, but they lack the strategic planning part of how to spend, where to spend in such turbulent times, how to prioritize our needs. Is it good to hire more? No, not less than last year when it was everyone was looking to expand aggressively. So this educational part became something that made this asset class also more attractive from the investor side to be part of it.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think we're nearing the end of this panel. It's the 30 minutes and 6 people is tough. Maybe do you want to, we talked about quite a few things. We talked about the way the corporate world will and is reshaping towards partnering up with innovation ecosystems. We talked about how the investment world is also adapting and is also seeing new needs to further the funding. We looked into how various enablers are enabling the development of new products and the development of new startups. I'd like you all to still say something you want to share about what you see as the next growing thing or what you are working on. What's the desire, like today, from today to in 10, 12 years, what's the big thing? Like if you could today draft a whole new strategy with 1 point, what's the key metric that each of you has in terms of changing things? It's a tough one.
Have to go first?
You can go last if you want.
Well, I would just go back to our thesis around digitizing commerce. I think that's, if you think about how different commerce is done in almost every other part of the world than is in Africa, that to me is just like this kind of this blinding opportunity. Now, how to do it, that's for us and other ecosystem players and entrepreneurs to figure out over time. I think there's a lot to happen in infrastructure and government policy and more investment funds, et cetera. But if you can just imagine converting what's often very informal, non-digital, transactional markets into fully digital stuff, the way it's primarily done almost everywhere else, it's going to be a huge economic opportunity, and that's where we think the future lies for us anyway.
So for you, the metric on top of the Excel sheet is number of businesses you manage to digitalize.
There you go.
Great, thank you. Then you on your side, Yasmin.
So our mission is simply to empower entrepreneurs to launch and grow sustainable business. And this keeps changing dramatically over the years. So I mentioned the change in the profile of entrepreneurs, but also the sectors. This is really starting to change. So we were trying out fintech as early as 2015 when it was still really, really young as a sector in Egypt and still extremely undefined. And right now we're going into a similar wave where we're looking into things like AI, like deep tech, and we know that we're taking like a lot of risks with different startups that are starting to explore this space at a time when the ecosystem is still quite young. But I think the key metric that we look at is, again, our ability to empower entrepreneurs in the sectors that are now emerging and relevant with the profile of entrepreneurs that we are now getting and the different, I would say, market gaps and the way that they have also been changing. So again, another example is we've seen sort of different drops and rises in things like the green and sustainability sector and also the health tech sector. So there was a sort of drop prior to COVID, and then after COVID there came this huge need and a lot of different market gaps that people really started paying attention to. And again, with the emergence of supporting services like what AWS does and different things, the entrepreneurs that are now coming have more tools and are more empowered to actually work on these things. So yeah, I don't know if this answers your question, but this is what we care about at AUCV Lab.
It does. Thanks a lot. And maybe we jump straight to you, Ahmed, because you're in the similar industry, so it might be interesting, and then we come back.
Definitely. So I would like to give two two parts on to respond to that question. So I think on Plug and Play as a whole, I think we've scaled quite aggressively from just being a US-based VC to scaling to being a global open innovation platform, and we've sort of positioned in multiple of the relevant markets where now by each market and each team individually needs to sort of scale their operations internally within their markets or their region as a whole. But I think I would just like to go back to my own line of scope and my own line of work, and on touching on part of the funding as a whole. A very relevant trend that we've been seeing within Europe and the US is availing corporate VC as a service. And it's just a new line of funding that's being availed to entrepreneurs, and that is sort of strategic funding that sort of guarantees traction and guarantees scaling through the access that the corporates sort of generally tend to offer to their in-house entrepreneurs. So that's something that I would personally like to work on innovating within the continent. Again, part of it is just definitely educating corporates on that scope, and that's something that we can do as Plug and Play, given that that's a service that we tend to offer. But yeah, that's just generally in brief what I would like to see in the coming future.
Hopefully. Great, thank you.
So the main KPI that I will be looking at is the same as what Yasmin was saying, is the number of new evolving sectors. So fintech, for example, in Egypt, it was the top funded sector in the past couple of years, more than $500 million last year. More sectors mean more funding, more founders, more motivation for founders working or trying to solve issues and build companies in sectors that are not under the focus of investors. So it will encourage both sides, funding and new founders, to join.
Thank you. Mark, do you want to give the word of the end?
We're wrapping this up.
Always.
Well, this is a big role. For any ecosystem to really thrive, you need the passion. That's us in this room that are making it happen despite the difficulties or challenges that we face from a number of different aspects of what we see today. So where people are passionate and making it happen. And then from there, the builders, the engineers, people who have the cloud skills, people who have the advanced skills like machine learning, AI, that we're helping to train 29 million builders around the world at AWS. It takes having the tools, so the cloud technologies, but also the programs that we're all building to enable entrepreneurs to have better outcomes. It takes a growing market, and this is a massively growing market with huge opportunities, and all of that requires capital to sustain it and to build it and to scale it, not only pan-Africa, but globally. And if we have that flywheel that happens, all those pieces come together, you have this incredible entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem, and I call that a community. And we should all be doing this together. Because we're doing it as silos, if we're doing it just kind of in our own little sphere, it doesn't come together as well. This is a community we're building, starting with Africarena and what they've been building across the continent over the past several years, and all of us here on this panel that are contributing to that incredible ecosystem. So to me, it comes down to what are we doing to feed that community to grow and thrive.
Thank you. So amount of passionate people is the one metric for you. So thanks a lot. Unfortunately, we need to wrap up this panel. And sorry, I'm a bit over time. Sorry. But the good news is, it seems as though it's all going to evolve, more capital, more companies, more enablement, more corporates supporting that game as well, and more talents being created and nurtured via the different initiatives of everybody in this panel. So thanks a lot for your time, for your insights. And if you want to continue this conversation, I strongly recommend you have a chat with everyone here on the panel. Thanks a lot for everything, your time, most importantly.
Thank you.
You can ask them one question. I will allow that bandwidth. One question. So that needs to be a good question. So now I put pressure. I put pressure on the crowd. It can be an okay question also. Any questions? We're good to go?
No, we have a question in the back.
You have a question.
So my question is, as ESOs, I'm very curious to find out, like, do you guys have any type of partnerships with, you know, DFIs, later stage investors, or like Series A investors? So like, let's say you've done your investment, like, what are the co-investment opportunities that you guys deep dive into?
And it's a good question.
Well, for me, it's cheating. I have Tamim in the room, so maybe I'll load it for you guys.
Gosh, I mean, we certainly do the sort of thing I think most people do, which is, you know, share deal flow with certain people, especially ones where we think it's a very good fit with the entrepreneur. Actually, I want to say most of our investment deal flow almost comes the other direction. So we get a lot of stuff from other funds who say these guys are a little bit too early for us, but we think they fit your model, and we'd love it if you took them and made them investable for us. And then we're talking, we've got discussions going with a couple of later stage funds to actually invest in our fund as kind of to solidify a partnership like that. So we'll see how that goes. But
So the answer is yes. Do you guys want to also take a shot at it?
Yeah, so basically part of our support to the companies that we invest in is that we put them in contact with other investors. And for us to do a follow-on funding, for example, we need another investor to be joining the round so they can set the valuation. And we were lucky that we had more than 50% of our portfolio companies having co-investors joining us in the follow-on funding in Egypt. And the investors differs from angel investors. We have only one DFI, which was a surprise to us, which was the IFC doing a direct investment in one of our portfolio companies. So yeah, this is something that we leverage our value proposition on our value proposition to the portfolio companies beyond funding, which is co-investment opportunities with different investors.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please help me thank all the panelists. Give them a round of applause. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.